You're a young boy, no older than 8, running barefoot through a quiet Balkan village. The air smells of pine and fresh bread. Somewhere behind you, your mother calls your name, her voice filled with warmth. Then, in an instant, everything changes. The ground trembles. The distant rhythm of hoofbeats grows louder, closer, like thunder rolling down the mountains. Ottoman soldiers appear on the horizon, cloaked, silent, efficient. They don't come for food. They don't come for money. They come for you. That was the beginning of a system so chilling, so organized, that even historians today struggle to describe it without shivering. It was called the devshirme, the blood tribute. To the empire, it was a political innovation. To the people it devoured, it was the theft of an entire generation. For nearly 300 years, the Ottoman state collected Christian boys from the Balkans, not as prisoners of war, but as property of the Sultan himself. Families lived in constant dread of the collectors, the officers who rode into their towns with scrolls in hand, and soldiers at their sides. The process was disturbingly methodical. The empire knew exactly which villages had been visited and how many children were due. Each family's sons were counted like grain, their names entered into imperial ledgers, written in ink as cold as the law that bound them. When the collectors arrived, resistance was impossible. To fight meant punishment for the entire village. And so, in scenes that haunt Europe's historical memory, parents tried anything to protect their children, hiding them in forests, sending them to distant relatives, even marking them with self inflicted wounds so they'd appear unfit for selection. But the empire was thorough. The youngest, the strongest, the most intelligent, and physically striking were chosen first. They were destined for the palace. The rest, those not deemed perfect enough, were sent to farms, workshops, or into the military machine that powered the Ottoman Empire's endless wars. But those selected for the Sultan's household faced something far stranger. They weren't just being trained to fight, they were being remade, their identities stripped away, their languages forbidden, their very sense of self replaced with one truth: loyalty to the Sultan above all else. What began as a political recruitment system soon transformed into something far darker: a ritual of control. These children, once free and innocent, were converted, renamed, and reshaped into instruments of the empire. They became soldiers, guards, administrators, and, for a chosen few, attendants in the Sultan's inner palace. Imagine the confusion of a child torn from home, surrounded by strangers speaking a new tongue, forced to forget his family's prayers, his village's songs, even his own name. The Ottomans didn't just conquer territories, they conquered identity. Over time, the practice of devshirme evolved into a kind of living experiment in obedience. The empire believed that if it could take a child and rebuild him completely, body, mind, and soul, then it could create the perfect servant. And in many ways, it succeeded. The Janissaries, the elite soldiers forged from this system, became some of the most feared warriors in the world. But beneath their armor was something tragic, a silence that history rarely hears: the silence of children who grew up without home or family, bound to a system that demanded their devotion in exchange for their humanity. When historians open Ottoman archives today, they find the traces of that silence: lists of names, ages, and places of origin, Each entry represents a boy who never went home, a family that never healed. These were not secret crimes hidden in shadows. They were state policy, recorded in the same bureaucratic handwriting as tax records or trade agreements. The empire reduced human life to arithmetic, turning childhood into currency. But the true horror wasn't just in the taking, it was in what came next. Once inside the palace system, the chosen boys were divided by skill and potential. The brightest became scholars or administrators. The strongest became guards or soldiers. And the most physically perfect, those with symmetrical features, calm temperaments, and composure, were sent into the Sultan's inner court. There, their education became more controlled, their obedience more absolute. Every gesture, every glance, every word was monitored. They were taught not only discipline, but restraint, to move silently, to obey instantly, to exist as reflections of the Sultan's will. The Ottoman court saw these children not as people, but as extensions of power, ornaments of submission displayed within marble halls. And yet, as chilling as the Devshirme was, it was only one part of a much larger design, because inside those same palaces, another system, older, secretive, and far more unsettling, was taking shape. It was here that the Empire's obsession with control extended beyond politics or religion and reached into the most private realms of human life. To the outside world, the Ottoman palaces were magnificent, domes gleaming with gold, fountains whispering in courtyards, servants gliding through corridors in silence. But behind those walls existed a reality that defied the beauty of the architecture. The empire had built an entire institution dedicated to regulating intimacy, power, and secrecy. This was the hidden world of the harem. To most Western visitors, the harem became a fantasy, a place of silk, music, and luxury. But the truth was nothing like the paintings and stories that later emerged. The harem was a prison gilded in beauty, where control was exercised not through chains, but through desire, isolation, and fear. The girls brought there were not chosen for love or companionship. Many were captives from faraway lands, from Circassia, Greece, Georgia, and beyond, sold in markets that traded human lives as commodities. They were trained to entertain, to charm, to obey. Their laughter was rehearsed, their smiles practiced, their loyalty enforced through 1,000 invisible rules. The Sultan's court presented this system as elegant, a world of refinement and luxury. But beneath the surface, it was a world built on obedience, hierarchy, and silent suffering. Inside the harem, rivalry was constant. Dozens, sometimes hundreds, of women lived within a single enclosed world, all competing for one man's attention. The higher a woman's favor, the greater her power, but also the greater the risk. Intrigue and betrayal were common currency. Alliances shifted daily. A whisper could destroy a life. And presiding over this entire structure of secrecy was another figure, one that history has often misunderstood: the palace eunuch. To most chroniclers, they appeared as shadowy figures, dressed in fine garments, walking silently through the corridors of power. But their presence told a deeper story, one of control, sacrifice, and systemic cruelty. These were men who had been altered, reshaped by the empire's will, rendered safe to serve in the presence of the Sultan's wives and concubines. Their power within the palace was immense, yet it came at the cost of everything that made them human. The Ottoman elite believed that only those who had been severed from the possibility of personal desire could be trusted to guard the Sultan's secrets. It was a belief both practical and horrifying, and one that transformed thousands of human lives into instruments of imperial order. In the grand chambers of Topkapi Palace, these guardians moved like ghosts, men without families, without pasts, their entire existence devoted to maintaining the illusion of perfect control. To outsiders, they were servants. In reality, they were gatekeepers of a system that turned human emotion into a tool of power, and within that system, every detail mattered. Who could speak to whom? Who could enter which hall? Who could even breathe the same air as the Sultan? The empire had perfected a kind of ritualized control that touched every part of human life, from the body to the soul. As the centuries passed, this structure became so ingrained that no one questioned it. The harem became a symbol not of beauty or romance, but of silence, a silence that still echoes through history's corridors. When we think of empires, we often imagine armies, cities, and rulers. But perhaps the most terrifying empires are not built on conquest alone. They are built on the quiet domination of hearts and minds, the kind that leaves no visible scars but reshapes generations. And in the Ottoman world, this domination took its most haunting form behind closed doors, in rituals of control so refined and so hidden that only fragments of truth have survived. Because as night falls over the domes of Istanbul, as the lamps flicker in the marble corridors, the echoes of those forgotten voices still whisper through the centuries. Boys who became soldiers, servants who became shadows, women who became ghosts behind golden screens. Their stories were not written in the chronicles of conquest, but in silence, in absence, in the spaces history chose to forget. Yet even this silence was only the beginning, because what happened behind the palace walls, the rituals that governed life and death within the Sultan's private chambers, were far more unsettling than anyone outside could ever imagine. And when we return, we'll step deeper into that hidden world, where power met desire and where the empire's most terrifying rituals were carried out not with swords, but with silence. Inside the Topkapi Palace, the corridors whispered with secrets that not even the marble dared to echo. The Sultan was not just a ruler of men, he was the ruler of women, of fate, of beauty itself. And within those gilded halls, the harem wasn't a place of pleasure, it was a kingdom of control. Behind the latticed screens, hundreds of women lived in silence, chosen from across continents, trained in elegance, obedience, and the subtle art of survival. Each step, each gesture, each breath, rehearsed under the eyes of eunuchs who guarded them day and night. To the world outside, the harem was a paradise, but inside, it was a gilded cage where love was a privilege and power was poison. The Sultan's favorites, often foreign captives or daughters of nobles, were taught that affection was a weapon. They learned to smile when terrified, to dance when their hearts trembled, and to bow even when their souls wanted to scream. Yet within that silence, alliances were formed, whispers carried between silk curtains, secret notes, exchanged glances, poisons hidden in perfumes. Because in the Ottoman court, even a single kiss could start a war of succession. Some of these women, Valide sultans, mothers of princes, rose higher than the viziers themselves. They ruled the empire from behind the veil, pulling the strings of diplomacy, betrayal, and love. But others disappeared, erased from records, buried without a name. Historians later spoke of rituals cloaked as purification, nights of devotion, where the Sultan's power was tested not by battle, but by the boundaries of human fear and faith. Many of these acts were hidden beneath religious symbolism, cloaked as ceremonies of fertility, protection, or divine blessing. Yet behind the rituals, the truth was far more unsettling. They were experiments in dominance, disguised as divine order, from Cairo to Constantinople, from Anatolia to Damascus. The empire's reach extended, and with it, the stories of sultans who mixed holiness with hunger and rituals that blurred the line between spiritual ecstasy and submission. No historian dares to fully describe what took place in those chambers. Only fragments remain: a diary page, a court whisper, a condemned poet's verse. But through them, we glimpse an empire that believed power itself was a sacred form of desire. And as the empire's shadow stretched over centuries, one truth remained: those who entered the Sultan's world never left unchanged.